All right. Well, good evening. I'm glad that everybody is here tonight. Some of you are going to be here this evening live, and some of you are going to be watching this when it's posted later on one of my platforms, either Facebook or YouTube. And I'm glad for everybody that's going to be here either tonight or later in a rebroadcast here as they view what's posted. I'm glad you're here. Last week, we had a glitch with the system here, and I lost my audio just about 5 minutes into the live, and I didn't know that. I went ahead and talked for an hour, and 55 minutes of that, there was no audio. And so when I found that out, the event got deleted, and we're going to go back through tonight what I first talked about last week. And so our topic tonight is going to be learning to trust again. And here's something I want to say right up front. If trust feels hard, if trust is slow, if it's something that's confusing for you, I want you to know that that doesn't mean that you're failing at recovery. It usually just means that somewhere there in our past, trust was broken. Somewhere along the way, we experienced betrayal of some kind and broken trust. And the vast majority of us were not taught how to build trust or how to rebuild trust. What we were taught, what most of us learned, is how to survive. And so it can be really difficult for us, especially as addicts, it can be difficult for us to trust people. Now, I want to make a touch on something else here as we're getting started. For those of us that struggle with addiction, for those of us that are in recovery, a lot of us tend to focus on regaining trust. We've caused harm and we've caused pain to family members, to friends, to people that we care about. And so what will happen, maybe we are married, we have a significant other, we have children, family members. And for many of us that are in recovery, we've caused a lot of pain there and we've broken trust in those relationships. And so as we enter into recovery, we will immediately go to attempting to rebuild that trust with others. But here's something I want to say, is that before we can rebuild trust with others, before others can begin to trust us again, I think it's important that we learn to trust. If we're not able to trust ourselves, if we're not able to trust others, we're not going to be trusted. And so we have to begin with learning how to trust ourselves, how to trust others, and how to trust God. The idea of regaining trust from others is a topic we may talk about another time. But that's a topic that can't be, or a goal that can't be met until we have first learned how to trust again. And I know firsthand from personal experience and from a lot of the people that I've worked with over the years that, man, it can be a real job for us to learn to trust others. I hear that from people all the time. I don't trust anybody. I have one friend that tells me, he told me for a long time, He said, I don't trust people. I trust my dog. And, um, and that's where a lot of us are at. We don't know how to trust other people. And so that's what we're going to be talking about tonight. Tonight is not going to be about forcing trust or about shaming ourselves for not having trust. Tonight, we're going to talk about understanding how trust really works and how trust gets rebuilt over time. We're going to look at three areas. I mentioned these a second ago. We're going to look first at trusting myself. Second, at learning to trust other people again. And then third, at trusting God. And as we walk through these, we're going to take time, several times, to pause along the way and to do a check-in. Because trust isn't just an idea. Trust is something that we feel. We feel it in our bodies, and we experience it in relationships. And so before we go any further, let's slow down for a moment. You don't have to type anything into the comments here. You can if you want to, but I want you to think about this. I want you to do a check-in with yourself. And here are my questions for you. When you hear the word trust, what do you notice inside yourself? When you hear that word trust, do you immediately experience resistance? Do you immediately experience anxiety? When you hear that word trust, do you feel stress or tension in your body? What do you notice inside yourself when you think about that word trust? Does your body tighten? Does your body relax? Do you attempt to go numb? And then on a scale of 1 to 5, how safe does trust feel to you right now? Trust in general. How would you rate yourself? How do you trust yourself, others, and God? And I want you just to notice. Don't have to put anything in the comments, but I want you to think about that. Awareness always comes before change. So what we're going to begin by talking about tonight is we're going to begin by talk about trusting myself, trusting ourselves. My voice, I'm still having trouble with it. I may be clearing my throat. I may be coughing a little. I apologize for that. But let me get honest with you for a minute here as I start to talk about trusting myself. For a lot of years in my life and in my experience, when somebody asked me a question, my first thought was never, what's the truth? When somebody asked me a question, that option, that idea of honesty and truth, that didn't even hit the radar, wasn't even present. When somebody asked me a question, my first thought was, what do I need to say to make this person happy? What answer is going to keep the peace? Or what can I say that's going to keep me from getting in trouble? Can you relate to that? Have you ever experienced that? Has that ever been your thought when you're asked a question? For me, that was my immediate go-to for a lot of years in life. And this isn't really because I was trying to be deceptive. It's because somewhere along the way in my life, truth stopped feeling safe. If I tell the truth, people are never going to be happy. That's what I had experienced, and that's what I had come to believe. When truth feels unsafe, people learn to manage impressions instead of living honestly. We try to handle image control and control the situation. And over time, that kind of response on our part causes real damage in relationships. Other people start to sense that something off. But for me, something happened that was even more damaging than losing the trust of others. I lost trust in myself. Because if I'm not able to tell the truth, then even I don't know who I am or where I stand. And I lose that ability to trust myself. Here's something important I want you to hear about that. Self-trust is not about confidence. Self-trust is about integrity. And so, as I entered into recovery, as I began to think about trust, the first thing that had to take place in me is I had to prove to myself, first of all, that I was able to tell the truth. Even when my telling the truth was going to make me uncomfortable. Even when my telling the truth was going to disappoint people. Even when my telling the truth was going to expose weakness or failure on my part. And I couldn't jump immediately to the idea that, oh, all of a sudden I'm trustworthy now. Because I knew better than anybody else. I knew better the lies that I had told and the way that I had tried to hide things. And so I had to earn my own trust back. And that began for me with small moments of honesty. It began with things like me being willing and able to say, I don't know. It began with me being able to say things like, I'm not okay. Me being able to admit when I made mistakes and when I messed up. Not trying to shift the blame, not trying to hide from what I'd done, but me being able to own things. I had to begin to stop the habit of softening the truth. Now, let me ask you this. Have you ever done that? Do you know what I mean by softening the truth? That meant that I opened up and I was just honest enough to have a defense if I was accused of lying. I'd tell a little bit of the truth, but not the whole truth. That way, if I got caught, I could always say, well, I didn't lie. But I also didn't tell the whole truth. And I had become an expert at that. It just came naturally. I'd done it for so long. It was the easiest response from me. And what I found is that as I began to tell the truth, first of all, to myself, being willing to admit to myself that I don't know everything. that I do make mistakes, that I'm not perfect. Being able to admit that to myself and then begin to be able to admit that to others. Every time I told the truth, I rebuilt a little bit of self-trust. And so let's pause a minute for a check-in. When somebody asks you a question, what shows up first? What's true or what's safe to say? What shows up first? I've already told you for me for a long time. What showed up first for me was what's safe to say. And it was a process of learning to be able to respond with what's true. All right, question number 2. Did somebody teach you, or did experience teach you directly or indirectly that honesty had consequences? Did you learn at some point in your life, if I'm honest, I'm going to be rejected? Have you experienced that? And then, are there places in your life right now where you don't trust yourself? What would those places be? The first step to beginning to rebuild trust in ourselves is to be able to admit those areas where we struggle. Are there areas where you don't trust yourself? And then finally, on a scale of 1 to 5, how much would you say you trust yourself today? Do you trust that you're going to immediately tell the truth to yourself and to others? And again, you don't have to post these answers, but I want you to ask yourself these questions. And then I want you to know, on that scale of 1 to 5, if that number is low, your ability to trust yourself today is low. What I want you to understand is that evaluation is information. It's not a verdict about who you are as a person. What it is information that we use to make a decision to be honest with ourselves and to begin to correct that area in our life. We have to be able to trust ourselves. Early on, I'm going to take this out just a little bit longer, but early on, as I began to work on trusting myself, people would ask me questions and I would immediately respond with a lie or with what I knew they wanted to hear. But early on, as I began to rebuild that trust in myself and to work on being able to speak the truth instead of trying to soften it and skirt around the edges, looked like somebody asking me a question and I would tell a half-truth or I'd flat out lie. And then I would find myself 30 seconds or 60 seconds later turning around and saying, I need to clarify that. I wasn't completely honest there. And then making things right. That was a big step for me. And that was my first step in the right direction, was being able to go back and own that I hadn't told the whole truth. And so we have to begin by building trust with ourselves, by learning I am able to tell the truth to others and to myself. So the second thing that I want to talk about here tonight, and while I'm talking, if you have any questions about anything that I say, feel free to put them into the comments. And I want to throw out here too, when you jump in here, whether it's tonight, whether you're here now, whether it's on one of the replays, and you're watching this later, I would appreciate it if in the comments you just do a quick check-in and let me know where you're watching from. And if you have questions, feel free to put those into the comments. If you're here tonight in the live, I'll try to address those. If you post comments later in a replay, I'll try to get back to you with answers to those. So the second thing tonight is I want to talk for a few minutes about trusting other people. That's something that can be really difficult for us as addicts, because as addicts, we have experienced a lot of rejection. We brought some of that on ourselves, but some of that we maybe didn't deserve or didn't expect. And so we're going to talk about trusting other people. And here's the tension that we live in. We don't want to be naive, but we don't want to be alone. So let me say this. Not everybody deserves your trust. You don't have to trust everybody. Trust is built through patterns, not promises. There are a lot of people in life that make all kinds of promises and never follow through on anything. And so we don't continue to extend trust in those relationships. But here's the danger. When trust has been broken enough times, we will have a tendency to start living as if nobody is safe. Maybe you found yourself in that spot before. I have. I have had periods in my life where I didn't believe anybody was safe. And I want to tell you, that's a lie. Not everybody needs to be trusted, but not everybody is unsafe. This is where isolation creeps in. We begin to believe that nobody can be trusted. Isolation doesn't feel dangerous at first. In the beginning, as we begin to isolate, isolation feels quiet. Isolation feels controlled. Isolation feels predictable. Isolation feels safe. But over time, isolation feeds addiction. Recovery always requires safe connection, not total self-reliance. And man, I want to be just as plain about that as I can be. Recovery never is able to take place completely in isolation. Maybe you've heard that saying before. The opposite of addiction is not sobriety. The opposite of addiction is what? It's healthy community. It's a relationship. And we have to have that if we want to live a healthy, stable life. Now, trusting others and learning to trust others again doesn't mean that we automatically grant full access to everybody in every area. Rebuilding trust of others begins with us allowing appropriate access. So here's what that might look like for you. In the beginning, as we begin to rebuild trust with others, some people get information. And the information is very limited. Information is very controlled. It doesn't go deep. It doesn't go to our feelings. It doesn't go to that place where we're being vulnerable and open in every way. Beginning to rebuild trust might look like we begin just to share some basic information. And then we stay aware and we watch to see what people do with that. Can they be trusted with these basic ideas and basic concepts? Some people will be able to be trusted with that, and some people won't. And with those people that can't be trusted with that basic information, then we don't go any deeper. We don't. But some people are going to be able to be trusted in that way. And so some people get information, and then some people get vulnerability. So what does vulnerability look like? Vulnerability is a multi-level thing. But vulnerability at its core is sharing information that puts us a little bit at risk. Sometimes it puts us a lot at risk. And so in vulnerability, we begin to open up some in the beginning, just to some, about our feelings, about our fears, about our struggles. We do that gradually. We don't all of a sudden spill our guts about everything that's going on in our life. But we begin to share little bits and pieces. And then we watch and we observe to see how that's responded to. There's a group that I'm a part of on Monday evenings, and one of the guys in that group has really struggled in the area of trust over the years. And at the beginning of the group, we'll go around and introduce ourselves. Hey, I'm Ron. And then we'll share just very briefly why we're there. And one of the guys in that Monday night group many times will mention, this group is a safe place for me. I can talk about anything here and I don't have to worry about it getting posted on Facebook. It's because he has learned inside that group that people can be trusted. And he's able to be vulnerable. And we need places like that. So some people get vulnerability. And again, that starts small. We observe how that's handled. And then we begin to open up more. There are only a few people in my life that I can go very deep with when it comes to vulnerability. And then some people, as we see how they handle that vulnerability on our part, then some people we're able to open up more. We're able to begin to share about history and our struggles, about the pain that we've experienced in life, and about the events and the things that have brought us to that place that we're at today. Maybe those things that have led up to our addiction and our struggles that we're involved in today. But my point with this is not everybody gets everything, especially up front. I tell people all the time, not everybody deserves to hear your story. but somebody has to. We don't need to be on a soapbox sharing everything that's going on with us, with the world. But we do need a small group of people where we can be open and where we can be honest. That Monday night group is a group of guys where I'm able to do that. And I've been in that group for over 5 years. And I have found it over time to be a safe place where I can be open and honest with what I'm struggling with and with what's going on in my life. And even beyond that, with my history and me being totally open and honest, there's not a really large group of people where that takes place. When I was in my active addiction, there was nobody that took place with. And I continued to spiral out of control because of that, because that place of trust didn't exist. But as I've been in recovery, I have a small handful of people today that I can be open and honest about anything that's going on in my life. And I need that. That's a healthy place for me. So let's look at a couple of questions again here. Do a check-in with ourselves. Again, you don't have to put anything in the comments. You can if you'd want, but you don't have to. But I want you to answer these questions for yourself. Do you have a tendency to trust too quickly or not at all? There have been periods in my life where I trusted too quickly, where I was too open, too fast with too many people. And man, I got burned again and I had to pull back some. But I still had to be looking for that place of safety and a healthy community. Question number 2. Who in your life has shown consistency over time? Do you have somebody where if something is troubling you, if you're experiencing some kind of struggle, do you have somebody, whether it's one person or a small group of people, who has shown consistency over time, who respects your boundaries? And then to take that a little bit further, are there perhaps safe people that are around you that you continue to keep at a distance because it feels risky and because you're afraid? Are there people around you that it may be time that you begin to open up a little, show a little bit of vulnerability, test that relationship a little more? Find out, am I able to trust these people? Because you need those relationships. And then we're going to end with another rate yourself on a scale of 1 to 5. How connected do you feel right now? I'll tell you, for the majority of my life, my connection was probably somewhere around a 2, maybe a 2 to a 3. But what I can tell you is over time in my recovery, I don't have a massive amount of people that I trust fully, but I have people where I can say with confidence, it's a 5. I can be honest with these people about anything. And they have earned my trust. They have shown me that they are consistent and that they're there for me. And I need that. And I wouldn't be where I'm at in my recovery without them. All right. Now I want to move to an important place tonight. I've shared before that personally I'm a Christian. Not everybody is. And if you're not, I'm fine with that. I'm not here to force something on you. But if you're a follower of the 12 steps, that begins by saying that we have to recognize that we're out of control and that there's a power that exists that's greater than we are. And I tell you, I have to believe that, because if I am the highest power that exists, this world is in terrible trouble. So I want to talk for a few minutes about the importance of learning to trust God, learning to trust that higher power. And I'm going to be specifically talking about the God of the Bible and why I've learned that I can trust him, why I believe that I can trust God. And for many people, trusting God is maybe the most complicated part of recovery and of life, because most of us can call and name specific places where it looks like God failed us big time. And for many of us, we've grown up in environments, lived in environments as adults maybe, where God was presented as somebody who's easily disappointed, somebody that's primarily angry, or we've been taught that God is only accessible if we perform well. Have you experienced any of those? Have you heard any of those? Maybe you haven't heard those exact words, but that's what's been demonstrated, is that God is easily disappointed. I can't tell you how many times over the years I've asked people, I'll be sitting and somebody's confessing a relapse or a struggle, something that's going on. They've just made statements like, I don't think I'm ever going to get over this. And I will ask them from time to time, if Jesus were to walk in here right now and pull up a chair right there next to you, what do you think he would say to you? And most of the time, I get the same kind of response. They've just confessed a relapse or a struggle. They're engulfed in shame. And I'll ask that question, and they'll stare at the floor, and they'll shake their head, and they may tear up. And I'll say again, if Jesus were here right now, sitting there next to you, what would he say to you? And they'll respond things like, when are you ever going to get your act together? After all I've done, why can't you get it together? What they've been taught is that God is a God of shame and guilt. And I've got to tell you, I was in the ministry for over 20 years, and I preached a message of grace. But what I demonstrated and what I believed was that grace brings us to a point of salvation, but shame is what creates change in our life. That's what I practice, and that's what I believed for myself. And that's why I never experienced freedom and recovery in all those years I was in the ministry. A number of years ago, I came across a verse. It's in Romans chapter 2, verse 4. And it says, do you not understand that it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance? Let me say that one more time. The Apostle Paul is speaking here, and he says, do you not understand that it's God's kindness that leads us to repentance. It's not shame. It's not judgment. It's not telling us what a failure we are. It's when we begin to understand that even in our struggle, even in our active addiction, even in our failure, that's where God is the closest, and that's where he loves me. And it's that kindness when I'm able to recognize his love. That's what gives me the strength to step forward and gives me the desire to change. Now let's look at a few things. In our relationship with God, trusting God includes first and foremost our ability to be honest with God about our lack of trust. I ask people sometimes, do you ever talk to God about how you feel? You feel like he's failed you. You feel like he's let you down. You feel like he hates you. Have you ever told him that? And they'll kind of duck down a little bit. No, I couldn't say anything to God like that. But let me ask you a question. Do you think God doesn't already know what you feel? God doesn't require sanitized prayers. Some of the most faithful prayers that have ever been spoken sound like, I don't understand what you're doing here. I'm angry about the way things are going. Or I'm afraid that you're going to let me down. The idea is that our pretending with God doesn't build trust. Honesty does. Trusting God doesn't grow through us getting all the right answers and all the answers that we want. But it becomes through our experience of his presence with us over time, even in those times that are hard. I want to look at a couple verses here, if you can bear with me. I want to look at a couple passages that speaks to this that we need to understand. In Psalms, David is writing, Psalm 22. David makes a statement in a prayer here. And his statement communicates the idea, I trusted you, and this still happened. It's found in Psalm 22:1, and this is a verse that a lot of people know. They may not know that when it was spoken in the New Testament, it was Jesus quoting a psalm that David had written. Psalm 22:1 says, my God, why have you forsaken me? That's a statement Jesus made while hanging on the cross. Now, Psalm 22:1 goes on. There's a second line. He says, my God, why have you forsaken me? And then he goes on to say, why are you so far from saving me? You're not even here. My world is falling apart and you're not even here. This is the same prayer that Jesus quotes when he's hanging on the cross. Now, what does this show us? What this shows us, if David can speak this and speak it honestly to God about what he's feeling, if Jesus can quote this verse about what he's experiencing, then feeling abandoned by God is not a lack of faith. Feeling abandoned by God is an honest human experience that I would argue all of us feel sometimes. Excuse me. I can feel my throat going. I hope I make it through here. So feeling abandoned isn't a lack of faith, it's human experience. And here's what David is expressing. David remembers God's past faithfulness. He knows that God has come through in the past, but he still feels abandoned in the present. Later in that same psalm, Psalm 22, David says, these things are happening. This is what I'm feeling, but I know that you are still enthroned as the Holy One. You're still in control of everything. I know that, but boy, it doesn't look like it. I want you to notice the tension that's there in that statement. I feel like I've been abandoned, but I still turn to you. Because experience tells me that you care. So trust isn't the absence of pain. Trust is being able to stay in the conversation even when things are hard. I want us to take a look for a moment at a verse from the book of Job. Maybe you've grown up. If you've grown up in the church, you've heard phrases like, oh, that brother or that sister has the patience of Job. Well, what I want to tell you is, if somebody ever tells you that, oh, they have the patience of Job, then they don't have any idea what the Bible is or what they're talking about. Because if you read the book of Job, Job didn't demonstrate patience, not anywhere. He didn't demonstrate patience. Job's cry throughout the book is, God has wounded me. God has hurt me and caused harm. In Job chapter 30 and verse 21, Job says to God, and he's speaking to God here. He says, you have turned cruel to me. You've been cruel to me. With the strength of your hand, you have persecuted me. You have caused these things. Now, I got to tell you, that's a bold statement. It's a bold statement. Let me tell you what Job's not saying here. He's not saying, oh, I'm sure everything's going to work out good in the end. He wasn't saying that. He didn't say, well, everything happens for a purpose. And I'm going to tell you, I have a hard time holding my tongue when somebody makes that statement. Well, we know everything happens for a purpose. I'm just going to be bold and say bullshit. That's not true. And you'll never convince me that that's true. Somebody loses a child in an accident, and you're going to tell me God did that because he's good, because he has a purpose in that? No. The scripture says that a lot of things in life take place because sin's here. Because sin dwells in me and you and a lot of other people out here. What Job says is, God, you have hurt me. And I want to point something out to you. And I've had people get angry when I say this, and I've had people try to argue with me. But just go back and read the book for yourself. Job says some pretty strong and pretty harsh things about God. He says, in essence, if God were here, I'd set him straight because what he's doing is not right. He says that. And in the end, God, not one place in that book, the book of Job, not one place there does God ever rebuke Job for his honesty. In fact, later on towards the end, as God speaking to Job and to his, quote, comforters, God makes a statement. He says, Job, my servant Job, is the only one who has spoken the truth. Now, what was God saying there? Was he saying that he's unjust? Was he saying that he is cruel and mean? No, that's not what he was saying. What he was saying is, Job has been honest with me about what he's experiencing and what he's feeling. And he's saying, I'm pleased with that. And what that says to me is that there was a relationship. If I have a strong, trusted relationship with somebody, then I'm able to say to them, man, you just hurt me. I'm able to be honest. Honest lament, honest suffering is more faithful than religious denial. God prefers truth over performance. He doesn't want us to act and put on a show. He wants us to be honest. And I want to go to one more passage here real quick. I know I'm coming up on the end of my time. I want to go to one more passage. This is from the book of Lamentations, chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. The prophet Jeremiah wrote Lamentations. The prophet Jeremiah is known by many Bible scholars as the weeping prophet or the suffering prophet. What had happened is that Jeremiah had prophesied for years and years to the nation of Israel and told them, you guys are living in sin and judgment's coming. He prophesied they'd be carried off into exile. And they persecuted him and they mistreated him and they refused to listen. And then they were carried off into exile. And Jeremiah was left there in Israel. He was left while much of the nation was carried off into exile. And even when he was left, even when the things he had prophesied had come true, the people still rejected him. They still mistreated him and abused him and refused to listen. At one point, he was thrown into a well and left to die. And it wasn't even another Jew. It was a foreigner that came and pulled him out of that well and rescued him. And here's what he says in Lamentations chapter 3, verses 7 and 8. He says, he has walled me in so I can't escape. Now, who is that he? It's God. He's saying, God has walled me in so I can't escape. He's weighed me down with chains. Though I cry for help, he shuts out my prayer. He doesn't even listen. This is Jeremiah in the Bible, in the book of Lamentations, describing God is blocking his escape, is ignoring his prayers, and is accusing God of acting as his enemy when all he's tried to do is what God has directed him to do. And here's what I find interesting is that this book is called Lamentations. It's not called Unbelief. What does that mean? Do you even know what that means, Lamentations? Lament is a term that talks about suffering, about pain, about being sad. But lament, true lament, is faith that refuses to disengage. To lament is not to be sad quietly. It's to cry out in my pain and my distress. It's to give voice to pain. It's to grieve out loud. And most of the time, when that word lament is used, it means to grieve out loud, often towards God. In the Bible, the book of Lamentations is a collection of poems that are written after the destruction of Jerusalem in 586 BC. The people are processing massive loss. They're processing trauma and devastation. They're confused. They're hopeless. There's a sense that they've been abandoned and that life is over. And yet, at the same time, they're crying out to God, and they're crying out honestly. Again, that idea that honesty is an important part of trust. Now, here's a spiritual trust check-in. Do you feel comfortable being honest with God about what you're feeling? Do you go to God honestly when you're struggling, when the world seems to be falling apart? When it looks like I'm trying to do everything right and everything still falls apart all around me and life's not fair? Are you brave enough and bold enough to say that to God? Life isn't fair. You're not treating me right. And again, I'm going to challenge you. He already knows that's what you're thinking and that's what you're feeling. And I want to present that he is a safe place to go to with that. What emotion, here's questions for you, your check-in. What emotion do you feel when you think of God? Do you feel doubt? Do you feel mistrust? Do you feel condemnation or shame? I want to present an idea to you that if those are feelings that you connect with God, where have you learned those things from? Have you learned them from church, from family? And I want to challenge you to take a look at what the Bible has to say. Not what somebody tells you about the Bible, but what the Bible actually has to say. For instance, when I read that verse, I'd read the Bible through years. I was a pastor in a ministry for over 20 years. And it wasn't until after my fall, after my going to prison for 2 years, that I read that verse, maybe for the 100th time. Paul said, Romans 2:4, do you not understand that it's the kindness of God that leads to repentance? It's not shame and guilt. It's his kindness and love when we recognize how much he cares. That's what gives me the desire and the strength to change. I never heard that in a church. I'll tell you, I heard that for the first time in a recovery group. For the first time. What emotion do you feel when you think about God? And why do you feel that? Where did you get that idea from? Second question, do you feel free to be honest with him? And I would challenge you, if you don't, why not? If he's really God, then doesn't he already know? Are there prayers that you have avoided saying? Things that you deliberately avoid being honest with God about? And on a scale of 1 to 5, here we are back to our 1 to 5 scale. On a scale of 1 to 5, how safe does God feel to you today? And I want to challenge you. God can handle the truth about how you feel. He can handle the truth. Now, as we close, I want to bring this together. We're at the hour right now. Trust is rebuilt in small, consistent steps. Which area of trust feels the most fragile right now? Is it being able to trust yourself? Is it, I just don't feel like I can trust other people at all? Or is it, I really don't believe I can trust God. He doesn't seem safe to me. What area of trust feels the most fragile right now? And what's one small, honest step that you can take this week? If you don't know what that one step is, if you're struggling with knowing that one step, then I would challenge you to begin by being honest with God. You can say something like, I don't know about you. It doesn't appear to me like you care. It doesn't appear to me like I can trust you. Would you help me to see? You know, that's a prayer that comes from the Bible. I believe, Lord, help my unbelief. That's a valid prayer. That's an honest prayer. That's the kind of prayer that God honors. And then question 3, who could support me in that step? This goes back to that idea of trust. Is there somebody that we can turn to? A friend, somebody that we know, somebody that's been faithful in a couple small areas. And maybe we need to open up a little bit more, trust them a little bit more, ask them for help in that step. We don't rebuild trust by forcing ourselves to feel safe. We rebuild trust by telling the truth and then taking wise steps toward connection. Now, I want to thank you for being here with me tonight or here on the replay. Again, if you have questions or comments, if you disagree with something that I'm saying, let me know about that. I want to thank you for being here tonight or being here with the replay. Let me know where you're watching from. Let me know if you have any questions or any comments. And if something that I've said tonight has stirred something in you and you'd like help working through it in a structured, trauma-informed way, that's exactly what I do as a recovery coach. And I'll just say, you don't have to figure this out alone. If you're willing, drop a comment, shoot me an email, rwcoaching2@gmail.com. And I really am interested in knowing, which area of trust are you working on right now? Yourself, others, or God? I'll be back here next Tuesday. I'm here every Tuesday. I'll be back next Tuesday as we talk about recovery. I want to invite you to follow me here on the platform that you're watching. All of my social media is on the bottom of the home page of my website, rw-coaching.com. My YouTube channel, all my videos are posted there. And I would invite you to check those out. Let me know what you think. And again, thanks for being here. I'll be back next Thursday. And I hope that you will join me then. Have a good evening.